Welcome back to the NutriMedical Report. We have an amazing lineup of issues to talk about with Harley Schlanger. And Harley, I guess there's no shortage of news. And as I said just before the break and the show started today, I guess the LaRouche Foundation is doing its job. In a sense, you're like geopolitical cosmeticians doing a peel against the faces of the globalists and the little nation, the satanic nation of Israel, that has every intention to pitch a fit when the outbreak of peace may stymie their ability to drop nukes on the Bashir reactor and the infrastructure and the people of Iran. What we really need to do is step down from a nuclear attack, also start to talk peace so we can disarm the 200,000 missiles aimed at Israel sitting in Hezbollah areas of Lebanon and in Syria. And we need to stop the idea of regime change because it's not going to be a pleasant thing. And you have some very interesting analogies, I guess, economically, too. You mentioned that they're trying to force not only the Europeans but the next president to be an austerity fascist. It's almost like the analogy that you get to choose which form of ice cream. I gave a much nastier explanation. You get to choose which legs to saw off first. Not that you're going to keep the other leg, but you get to choose which one is sawed off first as part of austerity.
Well, this is part of the imperial strategy, which is to say, well, you have free choice. You get to make some choice, but you don't get to choose to change the rules. And right now, we have to change the rules because it's the rules that have caused a breakdown of the global financial system, and it's the rules under which we're operating that is leading us toward a nuclear World War III.
Right.
So what LaRouche has always said, and he's kind of humorous when he said it, there's an old story, it says in the Talmud, when given two bad choices, always take the third. You have to get out from under the set of rules that are giving you bad choices because human civilization does not have to choose between bad choices. You may sometimes have to go through a period of sacrifice, but you're doing that for the sake of changing the rules to create a better future.
Right.
And in Europe right now, there's no evidence of a better future. And I'll just go through a couple of the figures that just came out the last couple of days on this. You know, the Greek situation is chaotic and terrible. The death rate is up. Suicides are up. Pessimism is up. 25,000 Greeks are leaving every other week to go try to find another place to go in Europe for jobs. It's going to cause a real shakeup inside the European Union. But Spain is worse. The situation in Spain, the debt of Spain is about 6 to 10 times larger, but it's not the sovereign debt, the government debt. It's the bank debt in Spain. And what came out today in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is the leading paper of southern Germany, an article that said that the real issue in Spain is that the banks have over-leveraged the real estate bubble that's crashed in Spain. And so the banks are exposed. Now, this is Banco Santander, one of the largest banks in the world. Banco Bilbao y Vizcaya, the BBV bank, which is all over the United States, all over Southern California, by the way, BBV. That's a bankrupt Spanish bank. And so the next round of bankruptcy, or the next round of bailouts, rather, will not go through sovereign governments, but will go directly to banks. Now, the Germans are really upset about this because they're saying, we're not going to give money to banks. In effect, they've been doing it because when they give money to Greece, it goes into an escrow account that goes straight to the banks. Just like when the U.S. government bailout fund went to AIG, it went straight to Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank. So, you know, what we're seeing now is, to use your analogy of pulling the skin back, we're actually looking into the mechanism and seeing that the real problem is not sovereign debt. Sovereign debt has gotten bad and is getting worse because when you shut down an economy, you can't come up with any money to pay your debts. But it's the bank debt which is driving the world toward collapse because of the huge volume of speculation and then the debt leverage that's been built on top of those speculative assets.
Do you think, here's the other question, though, that we need to raise. Is this an accident or an on purpose? One of the things that I found as a trauma burn emergency doc is that 98 to 99% of things that people call accidents were actually on purposes. where people just do stupid things. It's like, playing around with a propane tank, for example, in a lit cigar. Or, deciding to drink...
Or lighting a cigarette under an oxygen tent.
Yeah, exactly, and blowing your face off. And then
there's ample evidence of that. For example, if you go back to the beginning of the Euro policy, in 1990-91, when the question of the unification of Germany came up, reunification, and there were two options on the table. One was the proposal of the British, which is that Germany will only be allowed to reunify, as if the British and Europe had a say in this thing, but they would only be allowed to reunify if they accepted the euro, with Germany as the bailout of last resort for the euro. The other proposal was LaRouche's proposal, which was actively considered by then-Chancellor Helmut Kohl, which is that West Germany would be a motor for credit for building in Eastern Europe on the existing labor force and industrial base. Now, granted, because of the communist system, because of its inefficiencies and its failure, they did not have the most modern capital goods sector, the most modern machine tool sector, except in defense, which they had really worn down. But they did have a skilled labor force and decent science. And LaRouche's proposal was to extend credit for the development of the physical economy of the Eastern European countries, especially for infrastructure, which would have meant jobs for the West, production for the West, but also uplifting the situation in the East. And LaRouche said that within less than a generation, you could have Eastern Europe, countries like Romania, Poland, and others, with Western-style standard of living. Instead, because of the fear that would make Germany too powerful, which has always been in the last 150 years, 180 years, the biggest fear the British have had, they said, no, you have to be handcuffed to the euro. So in that sense, was it accidental? Well, some people in Germany were led to believe that this would help German exports, and in the short term it did. But in the long term, it made German exports too expensive for these other countries. And so now there's what's called a transfer union, which is that Germany is having to transfer wealth to these other countries so that the debts to the German banks can be paid. And that means the Germans are on the verge of hyperinflation.
Well,
so who should jump into this but George Soros, who in Berlin last week said the Germans should give up their fear of inflation and just accept the fact that they have no option but the euro. But polls in Germany are now showing that there's a growing number opposed to the euro. So we are on the verge of a ticking time bomb going off in the whole eurozone. And as I said, Spain, it's a bank debt. Ireland, there's a referendum at the end of May. In Greece, there are elections at the beginning of May. And now the question in France is, can they postpone the day of reckoning until after the second round of the French elections in the middle of May?
Yeah, this is getting hairy. And, of course, I think it's by design. I really think that this is a contrived catastrophe. It's like people dancing around, teenagers dancing around a fire of a building, say, look at this, the whole building's burning down. Oh, and somebody says, a woman walks by and says, isn't it terrible? All those homes burned down. And then another person walks by and says, yes, isn't it a wonderful job?
You know,
in other words, it was designed.
Intentional. I think the architects of the euro hoped that they would be able to maintain their banking dominance by forcing virtually all of Europe to accept these free trade austerity demands.
Well, maybe that's just one phase of it. Maybe, I'm just going to posit that maybe they knew when you allowed countries like Spain to borrow more illegally from German and other banks that created this bubble, that they did it so they could eventually cause a catastrophe and then force the world into a debt spiral, interlocking the entire world.
Glorious time to be free. What a beautiful world this will be.
And we're back with Harley Schlanger. Harley, lots of remarkable stories to talk about.
Well, let me give a quick update on the French elections, because this has a lot of bearing of what's happening here.
Right.
As some of your listeners may know, and if they go to LaRouchePAC.com, they'll see a lot of coverage of this. We have a LaRouche candidate in the campaign for president of France who is getting because of the French election law, every candidate has to get equal coverage. And what the media tried to do initially was cover Cheminade by saying, how can you say you're not the devil? You know, they would only ask slander questions.
How can you say you're not the devil?
Jacques
That's a good one.
He's a very smart guy. He would turn it around on them. And they'd say, well, how could you possibly have gotten mayors to sign your petitions? And he said, well, they're not as stupid as the media thinks the population is. And so the population reacted, you know, in these blogs where you have responses, it's 10-1 people defending Jacques against the media. So the media has shifted strategy. They're starting to give Jacques the chance to lay out his program. And the other night, he spoke before Sarkozy, the current president of France, on one of these programs, and Sarkozy started his rebuttal by saying, well, I've now had the pleasure of hearing Mr. Cheminade speak. And then, of course, he completely ignored every point that Jacques brought up. But Jacques brought something up this last week that caught everyone by surprise. There's a new European exchange called Eurex, which is engaging in derivative speculation against national bonds.
Ooh.
And Jacques,
in other words, shouldn't this be outlawed?
Hmm?
Why? In other words, it's a gambling ring designed to gamble against the stability of the currency. How crazy!
The sovereign debt of nations.
Oh my gosh!
And so this is direct. It's not through special kinds of derivative funds. It's a direct attack. So Jacques went public against this. And it caught all the other politicians off guard because none of them knew that this was going to happen. So the media had to admit not only was Jacques right about this, but he had warned in the late 90s in his last campaign of the financial crisis to come. And so the press is now forced to acknowledge his credibility. And so they're saying, look, no one will vote for him, but he is shaping the election. However, it doesn't matter because whoever wins is going to have to go with the euro and austerity. And so when this turned up in the press, the French people are saying, what do you mean it doesn't matter who we vote for? That if we elect somebody, they're going to have to do what you tell them? And so Jacques' campaign slogan, which is a world without the city and Wall Street, the city referring to the city of London,
right,
is catching on. Now, there was a rumor 2 days ago, what's probably going to happen is Sarkozy, who's the incumbent, and Hollande, who's the Socialist Party leader, Hollande is trying to steal a lot of Jacques' ideas. He's in the lead in the polls, and the two of them will get into the runoff for the election in May. The election is this coming Sunday. But there are rumors that Hollande would bring Jacques in as finance minister, and Jacques was asked about that. And Jacques said, oh, it'll never happen, but I'd be perfectly happy to tell him what to do.
Oh, boy.
So now the reason this is important is that everyone's watching Italian and Spanish bonds now, and their interest rates crossed over the 6% level, which is considered the danger zone. But as soon as the French elections are over, that's going to happen in France because the French banking system is hopelessly bankrupt, and it's bigger than the Spanish. The European banks as a whole have 4 times the debt of the U.S. banking system. Now, the U.S. banking system has officially somewhere in the range of $15 to $20 trillion of debt, but that's only because they've gotten 20-something trillion dollars worth of bailouts from the Federal Reserve. The actual derivative obligations of the U.S. banking system are close to $500 trillion, and the European derivative obligations are probably double that. Yeah. So you're looking at somewhere in the range of $1.5 quadrillion of obligations that are churning through the markets, making money for the speculators, but the money they're making is only available because of the bailouts of central banks and the Fed. But the amount that they need now is so much. For example, the Greek bailout, initially they said 90 billion euros will cut it, then 105. Then they got 105 billion, and they said, well, we need another 130. They got another 130, and now they say they need another 170. There's no end to this. It's really like the guy who's in debt to the mafia loan shark. So
yeah, exactly. And it's like you're down to the last. Not only have you sold your car and your home, you sold one kidney, and all you have left is your heart, and one of your lungs, and one kidney's left.
And that's where you say they come to you and say, well, which leg should we take?
Right.
And that's what they're doing, only it's not just to individuals, it's to nations.
Well,
and
I'll tell you what, I'm going to put a thesis together. Like you said before, the plan A was we can have nice tyranny world, or we can have nasty tyranny. And I think they're going to plan B, which is they're now pushing like a madman running with a large pin toward the bubble of the world economy, saying, I'm going to blow it. And they're going to shove that pin in the world economy, which is to create this debt hole, which is literally like the Hadron Collider creating, they're talking about singlets.
Dr. Deagle, they can't stop it from blowing. And
well,
so they'd rather blow it intentionally so that they think they can come up with a reorganization.
Right. Before
the nations of the world say, we're going to blow out the debt and let the banks take the losses and save the nations. Because the issue here is who ultimately gets stuck with the bad debt. Right now, it's the nations that are bailing out the speculators. And in a sane society, the speculators are told, it's your debt, you eat it, we're not recognizing it, and if we find there was anything illegal in the accumulation of the debt, you're going to jail for a long, long time.
Well, what they're trying to do is they want to do in one fell swoop three things. They want to get rid of the nation state by bankrupting America, the West. They want to tie the debt to Russia and China to get into the global social economic club. And the third thing is they want to get rid of the ability of nation states to generate credit, which is like the central system in China.
That's right.
Or the financial system. So they don't want any nation state being able to generate its own credit to actually get its economy going and bootstrap it. No. We want central control like the Soviet Union that crushed the people of the Soviet Union for decades and took a people that could have a gleaming economy and killed millions. It's just ridiculous.
And their ultimate threat is that if you don't knuckle under to this, we're going to launch wars, and the little wars will eventually become bigger and nuclear. And, here's where you see something interesting. You and I have been talking for a while about Russia and China leading an opposition to the British and the Americans in Syria and Iran.
Exactly.
And in this last week, it actually succeeded in slowing down the drive toward war. Now, ironically, the fact that the Europeans were forced to accept the Russian-Chinese policy on Syria and also Iran makes war even more likely, because it means the madman Netanyahu, who's a British asset, is now waving his nuclear weapons around.
Yeah, I know. But the fact is, even if they can bomb, they can't do a ground war without American complicity. And at this stage of the game, that means the end of Obama. Welcome back. Interesting discussion. We're on the break. One of the things I want to posit is that Bozalai, the fall of Bozalai, is a very interesting timing. He is son of, and I'm not sure if I can pronounce it correctly, but his last name was Zedong. He was one of the generals under the British operative, otherwise known as Mao Zedong. And Bozalai was a player that didn't really play by the rules of the other politicians in China. He was a throwback to the so-called Chinese Revolution that killed up to 200 million Chinese during the revolution. And what really was going on...
This was during the so-called Cultural Revolution,
right,
Mao and Mrs. Mao in the early 70s.
And there's a battle between two different factions. There's a faction that has parts of the 80 million Communist Party that have their sons and daughters, and they make grants, say, to UCLA, to the engineering department, so their son can go there and they can go back and develop intellectual property for better factories in Shandong and other cities, so they can have products and make contracts, like Foxconn and other ones, to make advanced technical things. They graduate more engineers just in Beijing than all our PhDs and all our engineers.
Dr. Deagle, this fight was fought out in the 70s, and then you had this guy Deng Xiaoping who came forward and overturned the Maoists
Right.
and came to the United States and said, look, we want to learn from the American system. We want to industrialize.
Right.
We've got to produce millions of jobs. And so this faction, which was sometimes called the technocratic rather than the ideological revolutionary faction, it's
Right.
the technocratic faction that's been running China since the late 70s.
Right.
But Beaujolais is somewhat, as you say, of a throwback to this older grouping. But what's interesting is what the Chinese are investigating is the extent to which his operation was being directed, just as Mao's was, by the British.
Exactly. In fact, the banking, most of the money, most people don't realize that Mao Zedong, just like the operations to take out the Tsar of Russia, the Tsar and Tsarina, was fully British-backed. And they don't understand that, in fact, we see Beaujolais, along with the removal of Kudrev in Russia by Medvedev, who's now come in line with my latest rock star hero, another otherwise known as Vladimir Ilyich Putin. And if it wasn't for his hand raised in the air, almost like Superman, we'd already probably have a nuclear war in Iran.
Well, you know, Putin and the Chinese they lined up the Arab League behind the Kofi Annan plan for Syria. And the Kofi Annan plan, it's not working fully because the opposition is refusing to lay down their weapons. So there's still some fighting. But the other side, the side that's supporting the opposition to Assad, are the radicals in the Saudi government, the Qatar government, and Susan Rice, who is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, who is a total British stooge.
Oh, yeah.
And for people who say that Obama is soft on Syria, he's soft on Iran, you know, Obama has this image of wanting to negotiate, but he tried to scuttle the negotiations. You remember on Iran before the meeting in Istanbul last weekend, which was, by the way, a big success, Obama said, yes, we're willing to have this negotiation, but the precondition is you have to give in to all our demands. And the Iranians said, how can we negotiate with someone who says the only thing we can negotiate is how quickly we have to give in to your demands? And so the Iranians went to this Istanbul meeting and threw in a real curveball. They said, our interpretation is that nuclear weapons are anti-Islamic. We just want nuclear power. And they said through the Chinese that they would be willing to guarantee there would be no enrichment above 20% if the West would provide them with 20% enriched uranium rods for their nuclear reactors.
By the way, that history of that asking for enriched uranium goes back to the mid-'70s. It's not something new. The Iranians...
No, the Shah, you're right, the Shah was asking for that.
The Shah was asking, not only it goes right back to also Mossadegh, who was removed by a British operation in Iran.
When they put the Shah in, British CIA.
They wanted to have a plastics factory and petrochemicals in Iran, and because they wouldn't give a large enough percentage so they could build a petrochemical industry, that's why they replaced Mossadegh, because he wouldn't go along with the British oil company that was involved there. This is all a British operation.
The British oil company. But
exactly.
You know, here's another interesting thing. You remember Ali Bhutto, who was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who was overthrown in a coup and then hanged?
Yes.
In Kissinger's memos, there were documents where Kissinger warned him that if you proceed with nuclear power, we will make a horrible example of you. And so we're seeing this British imperial doctrine, because Kissinger admitted he was a British operative. He said he briefed Chatham House, which is British Royal Institute of International Affairs, the British intelligence, before he briefed the State Department. Now, what we're seeing is the Russians and the Chinese coming up with a flanking action, and it caught the Europeans off guard because they were believing the Israeli, U.S., British propaganda that the Iranians won't negotiate. And so when the Iranians said this, that they are willing to abide by the Non-Proliferation Treaty Agreement and the IAEA, and the IAEA official said, well, so far Iran is abiding by that, this led to a complete freak-out of Netanyahu, and there's an interesting reason why. Because Israel never signed the Non-Proliferation Agreement, and Israel is in violation of the very laws they're trying to impose on Iran.
Well, the real issue has nothing to do with nukes, by the way. I'm going to kind of make a side.
Of course not. That's the whole irony.
The real issue is over something that's very dramatic and actually historically one of those end-time things that people should focus on. We have the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire. And what's really going on is the largest amount of oil now discovered in the Middle East is in northern Iraq or Media. And they're now arming to the teeth. They're literally becoming one of the now superpowers of the Mideast. And their main ally, believe it or not, even though many of them are Sunni, is Shiite Iran. And they're also making alliances with Turkey, who they just finished a giant pipeline between Iran and Turkey just a couple months ago. And now just 2 weeks ago, they finished a giant pipeline to Pakistan from Iran. So the fact is, there's a new player in town, which is the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire, and has nothing to do with nukes or warfare. It has to do with oil.
Well, and there's another point to this, because it's oil and also the next generation technology, nuclear. But the one force that's always tried to stop that kind of alliance is the British Empire.
Of course.
And the British Empire is using its puppet Obama and its other puppet Netanyahu as the enforcement arm of British imperial policy. And for their own reasons, for their own economic development reasons, the Russians and the Chinese are lining up against the British Empire. And when I say their own reasons, as you pointed out earlier, the Russians do not want to be looted the way poor African nations are. That this is what was happening under Yeltsin after the fall of communism. Yeltsin let the British come in and buy up nickel companies, chromium companies, the oil companies, and when Putin came in, he reversed that. That's why they hate Putin so much, because Putin says, look, we got 130 million Russian people. That's not enough. We need more Russians, but in order to do that, we have to upgrade the standard of living, and we're going to do it by developing our internal physical economy. And he has an advisor. He has advisors like a guy named Menshikov, a guy named Sergei Glaziev. These are people who are very, very close to Lyndon LaRouche. And I'd like people to go to our website to take a look at this dialogue going on between a Russian website called terraamerica.ru, where they have an ongoing dialogue with Lyndon LaRouche. These are top scientists and academicians who say that you may think LaRouche is somewhat strange in the United States, but in Russia he's a hero because of his work on the SDI and because of his attempt to coordinate between the United States and Russia a space policy so we can start dealing with some of the things floating around in our atmosphere above our heads.
Well, I want to go back to the original SDI idea. Was one that was started to be thought up by scientist Edward Teller. But it was expanded by Lyndon LaRouche into the idea that it would only work if it was a transnational space program, that you don't just have sequester for your own nation so it allows you to do a first strike, you have it so that it prevents all first strikes.
And you look to the common interests of mankind, which is what
exactly, which means you share it with the Muslim nations, with the communist nations, with Russia, and no one would ever use nuclear weapons under this umbrella.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that.
Welcome back to the NutriMedical Report. Amazing discussion, and of course, Harley, this issue is very vital because we're on the cusp. For example, one of the things that we're doing research on, I'm working with Dr. Pierre Pauli, who's been working 22 years in the idea of the Benjamin Button molecule. And why does this have something to do with it? Well, we're on the verge of limitless energy, space travel where space projects don't just go black op, just like they flew in the 747 with the space shuttle on. They're going to put it away in a museum. That was designed in the 1930s in Germany, okay? People don't understand this. Our space projects have gone black op. And that's not what was intended by John F. Kennedy when he talked about not only going to the moon, but to Mars and other planets. Our space projects are far more advanced than the public realizes. There's lots of advanced technology that could heal people, provide safe, clean energy, detoxify the world, provide a stable environment, and produce lots of goods and services while still preserving the ecology for other species and animals on the planet, and protect us against galactic events, near-Earth objects, and Earth changes such as the coming ice age, which is starting to proceed to become very real. The fact is that we need to be a force for recreation and for protection of the planet instead of a bystander waiting to have an extinction level event. And part of that extinction level event is that we are ruled by masters of chaos and ignorance. And the British are the perfect example.
In effect why we see Obama dismantling what's left of NASA. That's why we also see what's being taught in the school system is that the universe is characterized by the second law of thermodynamics and increasing entropy, that is disorder, randomness, chaos, as opposed to the idea that there was the world was created by a creative author, whether you want to call him God or whatever, but that it was infused with creative principles, which we see that are not closed. We're not in a closed system that's governed by the second law of thermodynamics. And so the whole premise of science education, that we're running out of raw materials, the only thing we're running out of is creative individuals who will fight for the truth.
Exactly. In fact, the primary principle of the universe, and I'll just go over these, the universe is 5 dimensions. There are 4 that we think of, which the 4th being time and the 5th being the torsion field. And the theory now by physicists is that, in fact, the torsion field exists before the collection of matter that creates stars, which are, in a sense, connected at white holes where matter re-submerges literally through the space-time vortex from the black hole at the center of every galaxy. That, in fact, planets and etc. and matter actually accumulates literally from the void created by that vortex field.
Well, and there's in a sense, it's what Einstein was getting at with matter, antimatter, that you actually are seeing the creation of higher forms of energy.
Right, but not
universe.
just the emergence of matter, but the emergence of organized matter and structure through what we call hyperspace. And there's 7 dimensions that have been worked out by advanced physics. And those 7 dimensions we call the dimensions in which our soul, or hyperspace, non-local, they call it non-locality, which is where cause emerges literally from the void, because order is the nature of the universe, not entropy. It's called duentropy, which means creation. So the universe is like Buckminster Fuller. There's a limitless energy, but there's also limitless creativity. And that's the real issue here.
That goes against the teachings of an oligarchy, which wants you to believe that your life has no meaning, that you're using up scarce resources, you're competing with everyone else, it's a jungle. And in fact, the actual history of mankind is characterized by what LaRouche calls the increase in energy flux density per capita.
Right.
That is that how, before man, the energy flux density was increased through the development of leafy vegetables, leafy plants, the photosynthesis. It's the more efficient use of sunlight and carbon dioxide. Now we're told by the idiots who run the EPA that carbon dioxide is a poison and we have to get rid of it, which means you're going to have to get rid of human beings because we breathe, and the effect of our breathing is to produce carbon dioxide.
Well, actually, breathing in is not a crime, but breathing out is.
That's right. And so, but this is what they're teaching 7th and 8th and 9th graders now.
What an obscenity. And the thing is that here's the real issue. With Dr. Pierre-Pauli, we're working on things like the anti-aging molecule, literally the Benjamin Button molecule. If people want to get it, they can actually contact me, and we can now get them to order it from Europe. We have energetic technologies like the pulse magnetic field, mild hyperbarics you can even do at home. We've got nutraceuticals and detox you. We have the emergence from the lesson we've been taught in Japan that older nuclear technology needs to be shut down, especially in a world where earthquakes have increased 500% in China, in Japan, where they are increasingly realizing that many of the plants here in America at 104 are sitting on fault lines, but more advanced technology is available. Right now, we can build safe nuclear reactors, we can make buckyball filters to filter out radioisotopes, we can make safe energy production that doesn't consume oxygen, because one of the big problems in the 21st century is going to be what's called peak oxygen. Not peak fuel or the danger of carbon dioxide, but peak oxygen, because there's an amount of stretch. It's called the carbon cycle. You pump out CO2, and that's
Deagle,
good.
It's interesting because you remember you had Cody Jones on a few weeks ago.
Right.
Cody did a presentation a few years ago where he's talking about what we should be worried about in the future. And he started by saying that within the next 5 billion years, our sun is going to turn into a red dwarf and either explode or else boil the earth. So he said, in any case, we'd better start working on these kinds of advanced plans because that's what mankind has to do. And the argument that we can't do these things is designed to convince people that we are enemies of any nation that's making a discovery in advance. And this has always been the British approach, to suppress native intellectuals, to suppress science and technology. The American system was founded by Ben Franklin in particular, who was a scientist, who was always looking for the new discoveries that would improve the conditions for mankind. And so we're still fighting the American Revolution in a sense, but in the United States we're doing it with our brain tied behind our back, because we're not using our minds to actually understand that it is creativity which is the basis of our universe.
One of the things that's positive about the alternative media, like this show, about Google, you get an iPad, you can get literally instant information anywhere in the world now. You can have satellite connections. Is that young people, just like throwing the seeds of knowledge out there, wisdom is starting to occur spontaneously.
Well, and this is what LaRouche has been encouraging with the LaRouchePack.com, with the basement team. In fact, this week, Cody Jones is addressing a major NASA conference. He's been invited as a speaker to address it on bioengineering and evolutionary trends for the future.
Right.
So we have this kind of, the scientists are now looking to say, they were asking Cody, well, where do you get these ideas? We don't find it in our laboratories and in our publications. And Cody said, yeah, because you're controlled. You've got to break out of that. You've got to get out of the axioms.
Well, it's part of the what I call the military-industrial intelligence educational complex. People don't realize that they recruit out of the top levels of PhDs, people that end up in a lot of these blackout projects, even of the media. Most people don't realize 25% of the major editorial boards, television boards, publication boards are people that are also parts of the No Such Agency or other lettered agencies like MI5, etc. They don't realize that they're controlled.
Well, they're all financed by an interlocking grouping, which is intersecting Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and the Royal Bank of Scotland.
But they're also belonging to these secret orders, like the ancient Pythagoreans or ancient societies, that basically believe that knowledge should only be released to those who are on a need-to-know basis and are recruited. And as a result, even tenured professors have a minimal access to 4% of the totality of knowledge. And when they think they've achieved, after 50 years of a tenured professorship in whatever specialty or knowledge base, in science, they don't have any idea that literally limitless amounts of information, knowledge, and technology has been withheld from them and purposely to control the population. If, for example, people knew that there were plasma distribution systems, because anywhere from 20 to 70% of power is lost through the power distribution network. If they knew that they could have literally, like Nikola Tesla, energy transferred through the air or energy from the vacuum. If they knew that high-speed maglev trains are already operational across the United States underground. If they knew that we had tokamak fusion reactors to create limitless energy. If they knew that human aging literally is a disease we are just about to conquer. Aging and disease. Limitless amounts of food without dangerous genetically modified food available. Yes, we could do these things, but the globalists want to keep us in a filthy, radioactive world where it's even dangerous to reproduce. That's what they want. Amazing.
We still can fight it.
We can. The phone number to call to get more information at the LaRouche organization, Harley, is
800-922-2907. Toll free, 800-922-2907.
amazing. We'll be in the States again next week or back in Austria.